Well, welcome to the next in our talks for this year's Rendezvous. Mark Kelly knows more about the Missouri end of the Rocky Mountain fur trade than anyone I know. And for example, you probably overheard I was just talking to him about Ashley's farm, and he knows where it is, has walked the ground, and is real familiar with it. But his presentation today will be based on some artifacts that we were given by a family member of the Chouteaus. And I'll turn it over to Mark at this point.
I want to thank Clint for asking me to make this presentation. The Chouteau family is extraordinary, and you would be hard put to find another family with as much influence on the fur trade as the Chouteau family for the entire duration from Spanish territorial days until the Civil War. But it's a little bit confusing. Not everybody can grasp the lineage immediately. Let's start with Madame Marie-Therese Bourgeois, married Rene Auguste Chouteau. We know of one son, or we know quite a bit of one, but according to William C. Foley, they found the will of Rene Auguste Chouteau, and there were two sons, but there are no baptismal records or burial records. And so when Rene Auguste Chouteau left Madame Therese and returned to France, he may have taken one of the sons with him. But anyway, we'll start. Madame Therese, you should be able to see, married Rene Auguste Chouteau. He basically abandoned her, returned to France, and she was left with one son, and that is Auguste Chouteau. As time went on, she met or accepted the overtures of Pierre Leclerc, and of course at that time there are no divorces, there are no legal separations via the Catholic Church or territorial law. You could not obtain a divorce. So that's one thing. But anyway, she has this relationship with Pierre Leclerc, this individual that you see. Now with Pierre Leclerc, she has a son. She has Jean-Pierre Chouteau Sr. So the half, or what the individual that would be the lineage of Cadet. And with Pierre Leclerc, this is about the only image that I've ever seen of Auguste or Jean-Pierre Chouteau Sr. So, but Auguste, Pierre, or Auguste Chouteau here, and then Leclerc, they are the individuals who are responsible for the founding of St. Louis. Now, Pierre Chouteau, Jean-Pierre Chouteau Sr. marries the individual and has two children. Pelagie is her name, Kiersereau, Pelagie Kiersereau. The oldest son, this is A.P. Chouteau. This is the individual I am most familiar with. He is the one who had at least 3 different trading posts in Oklahoma, one of which is within 20 miles of where my grandparents lived in Oklahoma, Hughes County, Oklahoma. I know where that post is. This is AP. AP was a graduate of West Point, 1806, and he's buried in Fort Gibson, post founded by Nathan Boone down at the Three Forks of Oklahoma, if you guys didn't know that there was a Three Forks in Oklahoma. But anyway, 3 years later, of course, then Jean-Pierre Cadet was born, and he ends up marrying Emily Ann Grascho. So this is the lineage. So yes, Madame Therese, her husband did go back to France. He did come back, but she did not reunite with him. She remained with Pierre Leclerc and with that family in St. Louis. So now I want to talk about Pierre a bit. Per Charles von Ravensway, He says the most distinguished of Pierre Chouteau's sons and most like him in appearance and versatility was his namesake Pierre Jr. An individual named Elihu B. Washburn, American statesman and diplomat who knew Cadet personally. Mr. Washburn was a member of the House of Representatives. He was Secretary of State under Ulysses S. Grant and Minister to France. But his comments describing Cadet said he was remarkable in personal appearance, tall of stature, erect, and of splendid proportions. His coal-black hair tinged with gray in his late years, his keen, penetrating black eyes, his pleasant expression, his French vivacity, his voice strong, vibrating, accentuated his courtly but frank manners, made an impression at once lasting and agreeable. Washburn added that as a merchant and as a man of business for nearly half a century, Chouteau had no equal in the Mississippi Valley. As reported by von Ravensway, Pierre Chouteau Jr.'s education was limited to the St. Louis schoolroom of Jean-Baptiste Chouteau, but he left before the age of 16 to become a clerk. And then Ravensway says after several expeditions to the upper Mississippi and Missouri without references, that he went into business for himself in partnership with other St. Louis traders, referencing the founding of the St. Louis, Missouri Fur Trade Company. And I need to make sure that everybody realizes that Cadet was not an original member of that fur trade company. He would become, but not until the next to the last meeting of that company on 7 December 1811, wherein they met and they dismissed Manuel Lisa from the board and then appointed Cadet to take his place. A month later, though, they allowed the company to lapse. But anyway, Ravensway continues. For many years, Pierre Chouteau held primary oversight of the Western Department, American Fur Company, controlled by the Astor family. And when Astor and his son, William Backhouse Astor, relinquished their grip on the firm in 1834, it was sold to Chouteau and his associates, who continued its operation, as we've said, till 1865, the death of Pierre. Ravensway further stated the restless nature and bold spirit of Pierre Jr. led him to develop business interests beyond the fur trade. And I will say, yes, he did. He became a banker. He exploited the Iron Mountain deposits in St. Francis County, Missouri. 1850, as a partner in the firm of Chouteau, Harrison and Valet, operated a rolling mill in North St. Louis. He was also one of the original incorporators of the Ohio and Mississippi Railroad of Illinois. And as his business interests grew, he was drawn to New York City, where for many years he was one of the country's leading financiers. So what he witnessed was an incredible period of change and growth from territorial days until the age of industrialization, which we will get to just momentarily. Per Thomas Scharf, his volume 1, History of St. Louis and County, he says that in the year of 1806, Cadet accompanied Julian Dubuque up the Mississippi River to present-day Iowa, where the well-known Dubuque lead mines were located, as a clerk, remaining there 2 years, returning to St. Louis in 1880 at the age of 19. It's elsewhere reported in this time period that Cadet accompanied Nathaniel Pryor up the Missouri River in 1807 in the aborted attempt to return Chehaqa. But anyway, and then it says, according to Thomas Scharf, that in 1809, Pierre Chouteau did indeed accompany his father and his elder brother, both of whom were partners in the 1809 St. Louis, Missouri Fur Trade Company, to some of the tribes, but he returned home in November of that year. 1813, Scharf says, Chouteau entered into a co-partnership with his brother-in-law, Bartholomew Berthoud. Merchants opened their store of quote unquote fresh stock of merchandise just from Philadelphia. 1820, Pierre Chouteau was elected from the county of St. Louis, a member of the convention that framed the Constitution of the state of Missouri, took his seat in that body. Berthoud and Chouteau relinquished their mercantile business and embarked extensively in the fur trade of the Missouri. Subsequently, Messrs. Bernard Pratt Sr., Jean-Pierre Cabanné became associated with them, forming the firm of Berthoud, Chouteau and Company, fur merchants. Berthoud died in April 1831, and the firm was changed to Pratt, Chouteau and Company, and continued until his own death, as we said, October 6, 1865. 1838, Cadet associated with Kenneth Mackenzie, establishing a wholesale grocery commission house, Chouteau and Mackenzie, his interest in which he disposed of to Mackenzie in the year 1841, the same year that he established as a branch of his fur house in New York. 1842, Pierre Chouteau, you guys are writing this down, aren't you? 1842, Pierre Chouteau Jr. established in the city of New York the commission house of Chouteau, Merle, and Sanford. In the year of 1849, Pierre Chouteau and James Harrison of St. Louis with Felix Valet of St. Genevieve became by purchase the sole owners of the Iron Mountain in St. Francis County and associated themselves together as the American Iron Mountain Company. Embarked extensively in the manufacture of iron. In 1853, Chouteau's Railroad Iron House, Pierre Chouteau Jr., Sanford and Company. This is the firm that just reaped an incredible fortune, putting to shame his amounts that he won in the fur trade distance, because the production of railroad iron and during the age of industrialization and the railroads just reaped an incredible fortune for the descendants of Pierre Chouteau. So despite the lavish praise of Elihu B. Washburn and the seemingly endless listing of accomplishments, and a story can always be interpreted differently. I want to enlarge upon maybe a couple of comments that we heard yesterday, talking about the rivalry that existed between the fur trade companies, as it indeed did. And just for the sake of mentioning a story can always be interpreted differently, if not positively rebutted. For instance, Andrew Henry, the individual that I'm currently working on producing a biography, Andrew Henry, renowned for his inherent honesty and integrity, was reported by Thomas Hempstead, partner of the Missouri Fur Company, in the context of his 11 September 1821 letter to co-partner Joshua Pilcher, to have said that they, Henry and Ashley, will not have anything to do with them, referencing in particular Pierre Chouteau Jr. and the membership of the Berthoud, Pratt and Chouteau Company, as they believe them not honest men for the mountains. That being said, there's one extraordinary accounting which me as an attorney, I dearly love going through these old court cases, and we're not going to go through page after page after page, but I do want to focus on some highlights. But the influence references the reach and the influence, good or bad, of the American Fur Company, which, as noted yesterday, was considerable. Despite the fact that Pierre Chouteau Jr. was not indicted or implicated in any way during the subsequent trial at law in St. Louis Circuit Court, it cannot be doubted that the noteworthy events leading thereto occurred with his full knowledge and approbation, as may be confirmed by the content of the letters of Jean-Pierre Cabanné, agent of the AFC, addressed to his St. Louis supervisor, if you will, being none other than Pierre Chouteau Jr. So if I may proceed, we'll begin 10 January 1828. Thomas McKinney, Chief Officer of Department of Indian Affairs, directed William Clark as follows: that you may grant permission to traders to take whiskey for their boatmen, limiting that quantity to a gill or a gill a day to each. Well, as you can imagine, how do you quantify that per boatman and make a responsible guess? So in an effort to reduce that uncertainty, on 15 June 1831, Clark was authorized to grant permits to the American Fur Company and to individuals engaged in the fur trade to take to each of their posts on the Missouri River 2 barrels of whiskey for each post. Even that did little to curb the flow. Jonathan L. Bean, a sub-Indian agent, wrote John Doherty on 21st of June 1831 Liquor flows as freely here as the Missouri, if we might judge from the number of drunken Indians. Yet no one gives them a drop, or at least no proof can be had. For God's sake, for the sake of humanity, exert yourself to have this article stopped in this country. If it was possible for you to imagine half the human misery which I have witnessed in consequence of the free use of this article, you would use your utmost influence in having it stopped. Eventually, to its credit, Congress of the United States passed the Act of 9 July 1832, wherein in Section 4, the Act declared with sufficient clarity, and be it further enacted that no ardent spirit shall hereafter be introduced under any pretense into the Indian country. The act, however, failed to elaborate regarding the penalty for so doing, and further did not identify the individuals who were charged with enforcement of that particular Section 4. And this lack of specificity, as mentioned, precipitated one incident of national import, the Cabanné-Clerk affair. And I hope I'm not giving you guys information that you're already extremely familiar with. But this incident had its beginning in discord between rival trading companies on the Missouri, thence evolved into a contest at law in the St. Louis Circuit Court, commanded the attention of the newly installed Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Elbert Herring, and the Secretary of War, Lewis Cass, and ultimately presaged the abdication of the AFC throne by the Astor family. But as William Clark, Superintendent of Indian Affairs, subsequently asserted in his letter to Herring, he had not been timely apprised as to the passage of the 9 July 1832 Act prohibiting the introduction of ardent spirits. Clark said, not having received any instructions, he basically said, I permitted the American Fur Company to take a limited quantity of whiskey for the use of their boat hands to assist in the trade under the authority vested in me. I also granted a permit to a trader named Leclerc. So fast forward just a bit, when the steamboat Yellowstone sidewheeler owned by the AFC, utilized to transport company goods to its multiple posts upriver, arrived at Fort Leavenworth on 1 August 1832, Captain William Wycliffe, then commanding, ordered the cargo hold search. You want to guess what they found? 27 barrels of liquor were confiscated. Wycliffe, however, permitted 6 barrels to pass for the use of the boatmen, indicating that the Yellowstone was going to 3 different posts, and they would be permitted to take 2 barrels to each of those posts. On whose say so, I do not know. Jean-Pierre Cabanné of the American Fur Company and Indian agent John Doherty were both aboard, both of whom witnessed the investigation, subsequent confiscation of liquor. Cabanné, however, in recounting the event, would neglect to mention that Captain Wycliffe did not confiscate the entire shipment of liquor. Regardless of the fact, the Atlas, a keelboat under the command of Pierre Leclerc of the firm John B. was still a week to the rear of the Yellowstone and not likely to disrupt the Sioux trade of the American Fur Company. Cabanné was overly suspicious of his rifle, as disclosed in his letter to Pierre Chouteau Jr., quote unquote, I am taking every possible means to avoid Leclerc's being able to ship any liquor. 6 August 1832, the Atlas arrives at Fort Leavenworth, duly inspected. William Clark would subsequently state, it is proper to remark that Mr. Leclerc was permitted by the inspecting officer at that post to retain a portion of the liquor which had been permitted by this office, and also 2 barrels belonging to sub-Indian agent Major Bean. So at this point in time, it appears the onboard cargoes of both the Yellowstone and the Atlas were searched by the U.S. Army and permitted to precede Oak River. Cabanné, regardless of the Atlas having been inspected at Fort Leavenworth, again wrote Pierre Chouteau on August 1832, quote unquote, our champion Leclerc will be watched and nothing will be neglected. I guess we could discuss what he meant by that. But the underlying intent of Cabanné's declaration appears certain, to take advantage of any circumstance to deprive Leclerc of the means to effect a profitable trade with the Sioux, but with little regard for the ultimate consequences, and perhaps unknowing of the fact the Atlas carried aboard the annual annuities for the Sioux. Upon reaching Bellevue, the agency seat of John Doherty, upriver, Fort Leavenworth, on the 2nd of September, 1832, Leclerc presented Doherty with this permit. Doherty proceeded to investigate the cargo hold of the Atlas and also permitted Leclerc to take what he said was 4 barrels and a few gallons in another. In all, I presumed about 120 or 125 gallons. Therefore, I, John Doherty, considered him fully protected by his permission. Story gets better. Leclerc proceeded upriver past the AFC trading post of Jean-Pierre Cabanné. Let's go down here. I want to get, this is Cabanné's post, where it's an artist rendition. It's Ponca Creek that comes out of the hills to the river. Maybe some of you know the buildings to the south, South Beach to your left, were all examined by senior archaeologist in Nebraska, Dick Jensen. That's a nice book that followed that excavation. He did not, however, investigate the north side of the creek, but I have, and there are indeed at least 3 buildings there, as well as a blacksmith shop. And but this is still just artist rendition. But anyway, Leclerc proceeds upriver past the trading post of Jean-Pierre Cabanné on Ponca Creek at the Council Bluffs. As far as near, he writes, the Omaha Creek, which stream is located 150 miles upriver from Cabanné's post, where on the 17th September, 2 weeks after having departed the Bellevue agency of Doherty, quote, very early in the morning, appeared on the bank of the river, not more than 4 steps from the bow of our boat, a party of 20 men duly authorized by Mr. Cabanné, agent of the American Fur Company, to search our boat for liquor. Cabanné, for his part, wrote Indian Agent Doherty, providing an explanation. When I went well armed aboard of the bribing felon Leclerc's boat, I thought of making a search in order to convince myself whether there was any liquor on board. But recollecting that while I was at your house, you told me you had searched the boat, my confidence in you prevented me from going on with that search. However, according to the report of 2 deserters, it would appear that you had been deceived. They stated that there is several barrels under the cargo and in boxes. If these facts asserted are true, pray do not think it improper in me to try to get the assurance of it. Therefore, I have sent this morning after the boat, the Atlas. My recommendation has been to cause no damage whatsoever, wishing to submit the affair to whom it may concern. Leclerc, however, for his part, must have looked upon his assailants with nothing short of incredulity, his cargo having been previously inspected not once, but twice. And he subsequently described the Omaha Creek incident as Peter Sarpy called up our men who were in bed, saying, get up and come out immediately. We have authority to examine your boat. You have violated the laws, and you boys come out on shore, or else we'll fire. Leclerc continues, after visiting our boat and found a small quantity of whiskey, they put down the mast and all riggings and rendered them masters of all our property, together with the annuities for the Sioux Indians. Our men went by land to Cabanné's post. Our boat was brought back downriver with all of our property. A moment of consideration will show that this is a complete monopoly. Our men drove off by force of arms, our boat and property robbed with that of Major Bean's annuities for the Sioux Indians, broke open all packages, barrels, our provisions used. The time of trade lost by retirement is enough to discourage any individuals who undertake Indian trade against the American Fur Company. Another description of the affair was by the sutler at Fort Leavenworth, A.G. Morgan. He says, this outrage committed by a member of the American Fur Company, I can give no other appellation than highway robbery. Mr. Leclerc demanded of Sarpy by what authority he was acting. His reply was acting by good authority. The men was told that Sarpy was ordered by the government and the Indian agent to take possession of our boat. Somebody's not telling the truth. But anyway, Sarpy continues, according to the sutler, boys, you need not be afraid of your wages. Mr. Cabanné has money to pay you when you get down. The American Fur Company is rich. The boat was then, by the order of Sarpy, unloaded and examined by his men on the pretext of contraband liquor. Morgan writes concerning the American Fur Company, is the American Fur Company so solicitous for the preservation of the laws of the United States as to stop by any means the introduction of ardent spirits into the Indian country? No, sir. Everyone knows who is acquainted with this company that they have been in the habit for years of openly introducing it in the worst form. And if they, I know that they sell for $50 per gallon at the mouth of the Yellowstone. If there be any doubt of the truth of this statement, I challenge investigation. But anyway, the ill-conceived, if you will, activity of Jean-Pierre Cabanné would have ramifications beyond a mere contest between rival fur trading companies, he being promptly confronted with the realization that neither Indian agent Don Doherty nor the military staff at Fort Leavenworth would take possession of Leclerc's keelboat, which realization no doubt caused Cabanné to vocalize and uh-oh. So a lawsuit was brought by attorneys Josiah Spaulding, Edward Bates on behalf of Valois and Leclerc plaintiffs against Jean-Pierre Cabanné and other named individuals in the St. Louis Circuit Court on 1 November 1832, identified as case number 97. The plea was found in trespass. As delineated in the documents, certain goods and chattels were seized with force and arms and carried away to the sum of $20,000. And an additional sum of $20,000 was tallied for the deprivation of all profits, benefits, and advantage, which might and otherwise would have arisen and occurred to them. Total sum at issue, $40,000. Cabanné and Sarpy were summoned to appear before the Judge Circuit Court to enter their respective responses to the charges. Cabanné appears to have been exceptionally adept in the art of duplicity. On 4 August 1832, prior to crafting his defense statement and being yet principally concerned with the continued practice of utilizing ardent spirits to reap trade profits, wrote Pierre Chouteau Jr. concerning the transport of liquor into the Indian country as we now must do, despite being possessed of the knowledge of the 9 July Act of 1832 prohibiting the introduction of ardent spirits under any pretext. But this is another instance of the rivalry of these trading because Cabanné tells Chouteau, what we're going to do, we're going to take the liquor that was confiscated, 20 barrels, get back down over to the landing at Lee, Missouri, and routed inland away from the inspection locales. But he says, as you know, telling Chouteau, Joseph Robidoux has Indians hired to go out there, knowing full well that people take overland on inland roads their barrels of liquor to keep from being inspected. And he says, this they will do. This they will do. So this is Robidoux's way of cutting down the competition. But Cabanné tells Pierre Chouteau Jr. that please be advised that the inland roads, they're only passable in autumn. They're only passable in autumn, so deal with it. And apart from the legal proceeding in St. Louis Circuit Court, Elbert Herring, Commissioner of Indian Affairs, wrote Clark that the facts stated would justify the withdrawal of the licenses granted to these persons and the commencements of a legal prosecution. You will there please to inform Mr. Cabanné and Sarpy of the charges and that a reply will be expected within a reasonable time. The fun stuff is this: news of disturbance did not fail to reach the desk of William Backhouse Astor. Let's see if I've got, there's Sarpy, there's William Backhouse Astor, current president of the American Fur Company. Astor addressed a letter March 12th, 1833 to Secretary of War Lewis Cass concerning the affair. And he basically says that to Lewis Cass that these people, it was not American Fur Company, it was a designing fellow, never mentioning the fact that Sarpy was in the employ of Cabanné. And that, so he says, rather than the American Fur Company personnel, for the failure of Leclerc to complete his venture, blamed it on Sarpy. Astor continued to hear these men talk. One would imagine that no person was safe who dared to enter the Indian country in opposition to our traders. But you know very well it is not so. We have conducted our business fairly towards everybody. We have taken no undue means to crush any of our rivals. And when our competition has failed of success, the result has been produced by their own mismanagement. Astor continued in this letter he says, as to the remarks about our overgrown monopoly, they scarcely merit a passing notice. For any man or set of men who possess extensive means and choose to embark them in commerce will rarely fail to be honored with this most unpopular title. Notwithstanding, we are innocent of having given any just cause for that settled and general hostility to our concerns, which undoubtedly exists. It has been the constant desire of the American Fur Company to make themselves useful in every way to the government in its intercourse with the Indians, as you yourself, Secretary Cass, can testify. We have uniformly extended the hand of friendship and the rights of hospitality. This we have done cheerfully and disinterestedly, and it pains me that I cannot say we have always been repaid with gratitude. Still, we have pursued the even tenor of our way, being satisfied with the recompense, I guarantee you that they were, arising from the happiness of having it in our power to do good. For whatever we have been able to do, we neither desire nor expect praise, but we do ask that in all our relations with the government, justice may be meted out to us by the very same standard as to those who are engaged in the Indian trade unconnected with us. So in summation, the St. Louis Circuit Court, having considered the sworn testimony, I will reiterate, Pierre Chouteau Jr. was not subpoenaed to contribute, nor were the letter books evidently of Cabanné brought to trial. But so the court, just based on the evidence and the depositions of individuals called in their suit for damages, ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, so Valois and Leclerc, on 26 July 1833. It is agreed that judgment is to be entered in this suit in favor of the plaintiffs against the defendant for the sum of $9,200. What happened to the $40,000? And each party to pay their own costs and satisfaction of the said judgment is also to be entered. I guarantee you the sum of $9,200 could not have been more than a hiccup in the American Fur Company profit column in that era. But anyway, apart from the civil proceeding, as far as the federal, that was Missouri Circuit Court, St. Louis Circuit Court. But as far as the feds were concerned, both John Pierre Cabanné and Peter Sarpy were prohibited from entering the Indian country by order of Secretary of War. The American Fur Company in the interim replaced Cabanné with, people remember, I know, none other than Joshua Pilcher at the Ponca Creek outpost, who then notoriously proceeded to plant, cultivate an extensive corn crop. Why? Specifically to supply the new American Fur Company distillery at the Upper Missouri River Post of Kenneth McKenzie, Fort Union. The existence of that still, however, would be reported to the authorities by, we were talking about fur trade rivalry yesterday in the discussion with Robert Campbell et al., being yet a competitor of Pierre Chouteau, reported the presence of the still. As to the American Fur Company's frenzied rise to the height of commercial enterprise, as overseen by John Jacob Astor and William Backhouse Astor, his son, would slow dramatically. By mid-year 1834, Astor family had withdrawn its interest from the firm. Although it cannot be said the Cabanné-Leclerc affair singularly resulted in the demise of that corporate entity, the publication of the Cabanné-Sarpy misdeeds did indeed serve to meld public opinion against the corporate giant and its perceived monopolizing practices, per review of many, many period newspaper accounts. So basically, that's the story. There are other incidents, I don't have time to reiterate, activities that were carried on with the full knowledge of Pierre Chouteau Jr. I won't say the word brothel, but that's one instance incident at Cabanné's post, because there's a letter that he wrote to Jean Pierre Cabanné that said, oh, one of these Omaha girls was killed by one of these guys. We have got to compensate her parents. It's got to be a necessary expense. Pierre Chouteau Jr. knew this stuff was going on. I might mention further that in Missouri, Doherty became a state congressman in Clay County And it's a time period, banking crisis and things are going on. And Pierre Chouteau wanted to incorporate his fur company in the state of Missouri so that he could then perform as a bank and be able to adjust credits, amounts thereof at his desire. And that is all I have. If somebody has questions, maybe I can hear them. Sure. No questions?
We got one question.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear.
Okay. You mentioned that Pierre Chouteau had a relationship with Manuel Lisa about 1808 or 1809. Do you know if he traveled up in Missouri to the Yellowstone with him, or could you expand on that relationship with Manuel Lisa?
We lost touch with you guys for a minute there. Could we back up and I could hear that question again, or somebody could repeat it for me?
Just if you could expand on Manuel Lisa, the relationship with Pierre Chouteau and Manuel Lisa, in particular for the years 1808, 1809.
Okay. Of course, Pierre Chouteau Jr. is very young. Now, his older brother, just 3 years older, is a member of that 1809 fur trade company, as is his dad, John Pierre Chouteau Sr. But AP or Cadet Pierre Chouteau Jr. was not a member, not until 1811. So really didn't have that much to do with Manuel Lisa at that particular time. But then, as you know, the War of 1812 came along, and that's one of the reasons why the fur trade company decided to let the company lapse in January of 1812 because of all of the things going on upriver. I've got a story I'm working on Manuel, realizing just how difficult this is going to be to continue trading on the river when he can't even get his boats up and down. So that has nothing to do with rivalry or with Pierre Chouteau Jr. It's just that final meeting of the company, they did remove Manuel Lisa. And the primary reason was that Manuel, as I understand, as the commentaries that I've read, Manuel focused primarily on trading, not trapping. Granted, licenses were not granted to trap. Licenses were granted to trade, and that's what Manuel could do. Manuel was active in that regard, and he could do it. Most people did not agree with it. Andrew Henry did not agree with it, and I don't know about Pierre Chouteau Jr., but Chouteau Jr. was not a trapper. He most definitely understood the pluses and minuses of trading, supplying trades, because they would actually supply rival firms if they could get the dollars and cents that they wanted. So it really wasn't really a competition between Cadet and Manuel. Manuel proceeded on. He was a force within himself. But on Chouteau's part, he was still very young. He would learn from both sides, because as we stated earlier, he's going to keep this business alive until his death. And he is not, there's no way he did not make a profit. I mean, as individuals have made studies of their books. So I'm sorry I don't have a more precise answer to that, but they are, and of course Manuel is dead by 1820. And so to my knowledge, I don't think there really was a contest of any kind between Manuel and Cadet. Cadet was just too young.
And Mark, could I ask you to shift gears here for a few minutes and tell us a little bit about Ashley's farm that we mentioned in the talk yesterday? I don't know if you all remember how many of you were part of that talk, but in the first article in this volume of the journal, the main person we're talking about ends his trip to the mountains at Ashley's farm, and Mark has been there and is familiar with the ground.
I have indeed. For those of you that don't know, my lady Carol and I, we used to lead history wagon tours to these places. I don't think Ashley's house was ever on one of those tours, but I do know where it is. To be more precise, I know where it was. It is not there today. So that particular house was the third house. Let me just, Ashley made permanent residence in St. in 1819. His first home was bought. It was a lot of 62 feet on 2nd Street. If you think in terms, those of you who've been to those first streets along the river, Clint, can you hear me? Scott?
Lost you for a few minutes, or a couple.
Okay.
Maybe
All right. Well, let me just say that Ashley moved permanently to St. Louis 1819. For $8,000, he purchased a tract of realty that's 62 feet by 132 feet on 2nd Street. His first wife died in this house. Married second wife, Christie. Christie's parents gave Ashley a lot on the west side of 5th Street, so he's going farther into the city, 340 feet in the front from Morgan Street to Franklin Avenue by 290 foot deep. So a larger lot means you can build a larger house. But what he did was in the year 1826-27, he put 8 acres on what is now Broadway, then Federal Avenue, lying between what are now Biddle and Bates Streets, where he built for his residence a very fine house on one of the lower Indian mounds. The grounds were beautifully laid out and improved with a fine fountain in front. So the map that Scott showed yesterday, that is a map that was done by Robert E. Lee, topographical engineer, one of his first assignments to come to St. Louis to divert the current of the Mississippi back towards St. Louis instead of the Illinois side. So that map actually depicted General Ashley's house to the north of what was then St. Louis. And this would have been in the late 1830s. But so he built that, and then came about. I will describe that house. Just give me just a minute. But this is a unique thing. It shows Ashley's ability to negotiate, even though he's not in business anymore. But as Charles Van Ravensway reports, says, with the city's growth came an increasing need for water supply. Most housewives were tired of struggling with water jars. Merchants feared that the downtown clutter of old wooden buildings invited a devastating fire. Also favored a water system for better fire protection. 1829, city contracted with a firm, Wilson and Fox, to build a waterworks, acquiring a lot for a reservoir with the ability to hold 230,000 gallons of water. They bought it from General Ashley on the Little Mound, quote unquote, at the corner of Ashley and College Streets, and then an additional lot at the foot of Bates Street for a pumping site. The contract with Ashley, this was amusing to me, provided not only for a water hydrant at the Sisters of Charity Hospital, but Ashley made sure, you guys, I want pipes to my fountain in my front yard. And he got those pipes, and that fountain flowed. And now a paragraph describing the house, the home by L.U. Rivas, the future great city of the world. The home which General Ashley had provided for his beautiful bride is well known to the older citizens of St. Louis as, quote unquote, the Mound. It is now in the heart of the city and would not be recognized. Let me just say now, you can find online the 1875 pictorial St. Louis. If you get that book, it's a large format book, it's online. You look at plate number 19, and if you can look at that with a magnifying glass, you've got it online, you can enlarge. The structure that's identified as Ashley's house is number 18, and it is 75. As Revis reports, it's now in the heart of the city and would not be recognized. It was then, however, a magnificent suburban residence. The house for those days would be called elegant. Front to the west, an extensive level lawn, and in the rear to the east, sloping with terraces to the banks of the Mississippi, all covered with fine forest trees and varied shrubbery, and the view of river and country was extensive and beautiful. This was the charming home of the most elegant and accomplished woman of St. Louis, provided by one of the noblest of men. Here, General Ashley dispensed the most generous hospitality, as Philip Covington found out or experienced. Graced by the attractions and dignified bearing and the elegance and accomplishments. You think this guy was infatuated with Ashley's wife? The former Miss Eliza B. Christie. So hopefully that'll give you an idea of Ashley's place. I will mention today that you can do a search of historic aerials. The house existed as of 1875. It was very soon taken over by railroads, a railroad yard. It is now today a parking lot, but I can walk you to the spot. I could draw you a chalk outline of the house, I'm pretty sure. Is that okay, Scott?
Yeah, thank you very much. That gives some meat to the bones that we got from Covington. And it really fits his description of a grand situation there. Any further questions for Mark? We're going to swap talks, Mark, so don't take it personally, but you might get some boots instead of mine.
Well, my pleasure, certainly. Thank you.
Okay, I'll introduce myself one more time for those viewing and listening at home. My name is Scott Walker, editor of the Rocky Mountain Fur Trade Journal. And I wrote a sidebar, very short article that went along with Bill Swaggerty's article about the stereotypes of the mountain men. And what I was trying to do was to take movies that are easy to buy on DVD that you all might be interested in watching and see how they fit into the four stereotypes that Bill was talking about. Now, no movie is all one thing or another, and all the stereotypes will cross back and forth, but I think you'll agree with me that the movies that I've decided to highlight fit predominantly into one stereotype or the other. And I really enjoyed writing an article that basically was all my opinion and I didn't have to footnote it. The first movie I want to talk about will have to do with the romantic hero stereotype. And I poked around trying to find a mountaineer who was presented as a romantic hero. And what immediately jumped into my mind was a film that I saw back when I was in grade school. I saw it first run, and it was How the West Was Won. And Jimmy Stewart really made an impression on me, as a mountaineer. So I got the DVD from our local library and I popped it in the machine. And guess how long Jimmy Stewart is actually in the mountains in this movie? 3.5 minutes. And that's how fast they're getting down to the Ohio River so he can get together with, who was it? Carol Baker and Debbie Reynolds and all the rest of them. So they moved the plot out of the mountains in just supersonic speed. So that one was out. So I started looking around, and then I realized that this fellow here in his late 20s made his first starring role as a mountain man in the movie The Big Trail. This is a very, very, very young John Wayne. And the movie was called The Big Trail, came out in 1930. And for its time, it was a big production. It was directed by Raoul Walsh. It cost the princely sum to make of $1,250,000. It was filmed in 6 states. There were parts of it that were filmed not far from here, up around Jackson. There were parts of it filmed in California, Arizona. Let's see, I have the Utah, Montana, and Oregon. So for its time, filming on location was actually kind of avant-garde. It added to the heroic nature of this film. It was meant to be a big film, and it was a good way to launch the person who became the kind of archetypical heroic Western character in the movies. It was shot, I'm going to go through a few technical details about the film because it was very interesting and you really should watch it. At the same time, it was shot in 35 millimeter and 70 millimeter. 2 different camera crews were working at the same time. Because it was a black and white film, they looked at light and dark differently than we do with color movies. And so many of the scenes were extremely dramatic. John Wayne played a character called Breck Coleman, and he was an easygoing mountain man. He had just come back from Missouri and found that an old friend of his has had his furs stolen, and he was murdered. So Coleman decides he's going to figure out who did it, and he's going to get his own justice with them. Oh, look at the movie poster here. All talking. And also, it's the most important picture ever produced. So now you know. See that around the bottom? They really were trying to go for a big presentation. They had a cast of approximately 1,000 people with additional extras. They used Native American extras to play Native Americans, which was unusual for its time. They got together a whole wagon train. The plot is that this wagon train is going to Oregon, and the John Wayne character thinks that his friend's murderers are part of the wagon train. So he joins the wagon train, and because of his knowledge as a mountain man, he becomes the guide. And that fits into that stereotype Bill was talking about as someone who has a knowledge of the country and capabilities to be a heroic character, but also carries that lightly. I saw this picture once portrayed as an actual wagon train. The photography was good enough that occasionally they slip big trail pictures into history books and call them historic photos. When they filmed lowering the wagons down an embankment, and I believe they filmed this up by Jackson, they literally lowered wagons down the embankment. And to give you a sense of the difference between the 35 millimeter version and the 70 millimeter version of the same scene, you can see that people are in slightly different places. That's because you had different film crews. And look at what the black and white does. I mean, it's almost like an Ansel Adams movie in some cases when they deal with the landscape. Again, the 70 millimeter view. Now, Breck Coleman repeatedly saves the wagon train with his knowledge of the frontier and his skills as a mountain man, always being in the heroic character. At this time, when they wanted to make movies in many different languages, they had different casts, and they would film the movie, taking takes over and over again with different actors speaking the language that they wanted to make the additional movie in. So these are the Italian, French, German, and Spanish actors who played John Wayne's part, all in the same costume, and they would take turns filming each one with a cast that could speak the language that they wanted to make the movie in. And this is a publicity still from the French version of the of the big trail, which was called, and my French is not very good, La Piste des Gens. This is a villain. This is Tyrone Power Sr., and he is the scuzziest bad guy that you'll ever, the movie's worth watching just to see this guy play a bad guy. And he is indeed the one who murdered John Wayne's partner. And they have several face-offs through the movie. And in each case, John Wayne is portrayed as a heroic character who doesn't get flustered, faces down the bad guys and makes them back down. One of the characters at one point comments about Wayne's character and says he's from the mountains. He knows everything about this country. We can't win against this person. Now, the love interest in this film was played by Marguerite Churchill, and she was a well-known actress of this period. And in the course of the plot, John Wayne thinks he's the daughter of a family that he grew up with when she's sitting in a chair facing the other way. So he sneaks up behind her and gives her a big hug and a kiss, and she's outraged because she's from a more genteel family. And so, of course, in Hollywood style, that means they're going to have to fall in love. But it goes back and forth and on again, off again. And she actually originally seems attracted to a gambler character, yet another bad guy. And this was played by Ian Keith. And so in the course of the movie, she has to figure out who's wearing the black hat and the white hat. Lots of face downs, lots of male pulchritude in this movie. And then slowly, Marguerite and John Wayne figure it out. And I found this kind of interesting. When I watched the movie and I saw this short scene with this framing, the way they framed it, it reminded me of this, which is over in Cody. And it made me wonder, this painting came out in 1921 and it was popular pretty much right away. And it made me wonder if the filmmakers were aware of it. An interesting thing for a movie of this time, they did use sign language. The Native American extras were actually played by Native Americans. And they had interactions with Indians that were trade interactions along the Oregon Trail of this movie. And then they had the classic Circle the Wagons Indian fight. So they tried to cover a lot of the bases. For its time, it was a pretty expansive movie. Here's the Circle the Wagons scene. And it's classic. They get the wagon circled, and you see the woman in the background loading for the men who are shooting, and typical, I mean, just perfect Hollywood. They finally get to their promised land in Oregon, and Coleman won't take the last part of the trip with him because he has unfinished business. So he tracks down Tyrone Power Sr. in a snowstorm scene and kills him. But again, in the heroic structure of a classic Western, they spend the whole plot getting the viewer to think that guy needed killing. And so when John Wayne kills the bad guy, you go, okay. So this was a film that represented the hero character. Now for the daring but degenerate movie, I picked The Revenant. And I thought they did a really, I want to take a moment and have you all contemplate how far we've come in the last 40 years. The tone of the movie overall was pretty dark and grim. And the poor characters in this movie never seemed to get much of an even break. They were always cheating death and trying to overcome nature or Native American attacks. And another comparison, and I don't know if the movie makers were aware of it, but the horse jumping scene, which is really pretty blurry, but if you've seen the movie, you probably remember it, reminded me of a painting from the 1840s called The Death Struggle. Although Leonardo DiCaprio didn't have to deal with a warrior clinging to his torso. Now, the character I want to talk about was played by John Hardy, and it was the I'm sorry? What did I say? Tom Hardy. And he played Fitzgerald, who was the villain of this piece. And when you think about the terms daring but delinquent, I think you've got to remember that what Bill was saying was not that the person was incompetent, not that the person wasn't skilled, not that the person didn't have personal bravery, but that he was socially degenerate. He didn't fit into the settlement ideas of behavior. And just to play devil's advocate, there's a comedian out there that says, like the devil needs an advocate. To play devil's advocate, the character that Hardy portrayed in the film was very skillful. If he wasn't out to kill you, he would probably help keep you alive. It's interesting that the company person, that was, I've got the wrong card, was, is it Domhnall? Domhnall Gleeson, the fellow, Domhnall Gleeson played Henry in this film. I don't know if you know it, but Clay Landry was their historical advisor and knows this movie, I mean, from, you helped bring it into the world. Anyway, the company character, the person who was nominally in charge, wasn't as strong a character as the Tom Hardy character. And if you think about it, even though I guess you could say he was degenerate for wanting to leave Hugh Glass, leave the Leonardo DiCaprio character behind, he was actually, in a hard-nosed way, making a lot of sense. That's the devil's advocate part. This is Will Poulter playing Jim Bridger. But just a classic representation of a mean guy. And in classic Western form, they spent the whole movie convincing you he needed killing, and in the end, he got killed. It's also interesting that the hero of the film, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Hugh Glass, was also daring but delinquent. Skillful, he survived this intense situation in the wilderness, but you can't really feel like he fit into society very well either. So that's why I chose this movie to represent that stereotype. Now, the next stereotype that Bill talked about was the expectant capitalist. In other words, a businessman that went into the fur trade simply because that's where the money was. And I chose Across the Wide Missouri because this is one of the few movies that has a strong element of the business angles of the fur trade. And in the plot of this film, Clark Gable is wanting to push his trading and trapping operation into Blackfeet country because that's where the furs are. And in the course of the film, he makes decisions that are basically business-based. Now, the movie was based on Bernard DeVoto's book, so it had a toe in some historical references, like the William Drummond Stewart character, who in this movie was named Captain Humberstone lion instead of William Drummond Stewart. They attempted some historical accuracy. They did study sign language. A lot of the Native American words you hear in the movie are the trade language of the Columbia River. They're not actually individual to the different, they're not Blackfeet or Nez Perce, but at least they gave it a try. This is Clark Gable negotiating for a wife, but there's no romance in it. He basically wants to trade for a woman who is a Blackfeet in order to use her as a calling card to get him into the Blackfeet country to build his fort. The Native American characters in this movie were played by Maria Elena Marquez. And this particular actor you see is Jack Holt. In other words, they did not use Native Americans to play Native Americans. Although I did appreciate that one thing in this movie was there was a lot of give and take between the Native American characters and the Anglo characters. And you got a feeling that there was a, for want of a better word, an ecosystem in which the tribes and the trappers all moved in the same environment and had to deal with one another. Like I said, the main romantic interest in this film was, initially anyway, a business venture. His idea of marrying a woman who could give him contacts with the Blackfeet. This is an Alfred Jacob Miller painting of Fort William, or what we call Fort Laramie now. And in the plot of the movie, an actual fort did figure in it. I lost the picture. Anyway, they built a fort like they did for the Revenant, and it was reasonably accurate. This is John Johnson. And if you take John Johnson and mix him with a popular novel, you get Robert Redford. And this is my last film for the Family Man and Community Builder. And I chose this movie because it had a lot of elements in it that built a community in the mountains. Now, it's a fictional community. There weren't many people in it, but all the interactions of a community were there. And they also dealt with an Anglo-Indian marriage in there. And that's Will Geer, one of the classic mountain characters in film. Bear Claw Chris Lapp. And this is in the plot of this movie and how the Robert Redford character ends up being part of a community is that he goes to the mountains, he wants to be a mountaineer. He gets a internship, we'll call it, with Will Geer, and learns enough skills that he's able to survive in the mountains. And then he comes across a settler's cabin where all but the mother of a family and one of the kids has been killed. And this is Aline Ann McCleary, and she plays shorthanded the character of the crazy woman. She forces Robert Redford to take her son on and kind of a forced adoption. And then a few minutes later in the movie, he's forced into a marriage. Actually, I probably don't even need to describe the plot of this movie. How many people can recite passages from this movie? Okay. This is one of my favorite scenes. They come across Del Gue buried up to his neck. Some good banter there. They did a better job, I think, of portraying a marriage relationship in the mountains mixed in with the fur trade with Del Bolton as Swan and Robert Redford. And I think the way that they portrayed their relationship growing over the film, I think was touching and unusual for Western movies. It was very well done. Also, this actress, it's interesting, she did this movie and then she dropped off the scene. She didn't do, except for one that I can find. If you're familiar with the TV show Monk, she had a part in one of the Monk episodes. And that's the only other reference I can find to her ever acting again. She brought her skills to Jeremiah's. This is the scene where she's convincing him not to go ahead and shoot a grouse with a rifle that would blow him to feathers and instead hunt the grouse with rocks. Anyone can recite this scene? Yeah, as I remember it as, I'm a great hunter, yes. You know, that's all you need to know. Fine figure of a man. But I can't say enough, in my opinion, about the character of Swan and their relationship as it was portrayed. So that was the family man part, and then the fact that the group of them with Chris Lapp and Del Gue and paints his shirt red, who is the Crow chief that comes in and out of the plot, and Swan and all the rest of them, they form a complete community, which is, oh, that's the tailoring scene. Trying to get to, the community is upset by the intrusion of an Army lieutenant and a reverend who need help to rescue some settlers. And the film kind of takes a turn at that point. But at the end of the film, after all the murder and mayhem, there's a piece between Paints His Shirt Red and Jeremiah Johnson, which returns the community. And Paints His Shirt Red was played by Joaquin Martinez. So again, not using Native American actors to play Native Americans. And this side is to remind me, there's a point that I'd like to interject, although Clay convinced me a few years ago that my opinions of what movies should be will be weighed against the millions of dollars that they can make doing what they do. But I think that in a classic mountaineer movie, you need the land. The land has to be almost an extra character. You can't make a mountain man movie on a small set in California. You need the background history, which all of these movies at least had a toe in. But you also need something I call the Joe Meek effect, which is a sense of humor and an occasional tongue in the cheek. And it's kind of like cowboy humor. And I think at its best in movies when they can put a little bit of lightness into it. When you read the journals, you get the feeling that every now and then people enjoyed a good joke. It wasn't all galley slave grimness. So the characters that I would say are among the best to portray the Joe Meek effect are Will Geer. And then out of the movie The Mountain Man, I'm just going to throw this one in real quickly. The banter between Brian Keith and Charlton Heston is classic. The movie was a comedy. It's a movie. It's not even close to history, but it was heavy on the Joe Meek effect. And then Del Gue, the actor Stefan Girash, and I don't know if anyone knows exactly how to pronounce that name. He passed away just a few years ago. And earlier I asked who can recite lines from this movie. I have a friend down in Fort Collins who will get off on this rant, and he'll go on for the whole scene. He knows it all. And I know a lot of people who probably know more quotes from Jeremiah Johnson than they know from Warren Ferris or Osborne Russell. Any questions? Yeah. Hmm?
And it was one done by Tim McCoy. It's a silent movie.
Oh,
And it's called Covered Wagon.
I haven't seen that.
And that one, the guides are supposedly mountain men who have taken on the trip to take this wagon train to the mountains, through the mountains. And one of the interesting things is Tim McCoy, if you remember, I don't know how any of the younger people know who Tim McCoy was. But
Didn't he do Hopalong Cassidy?
he did a lot of those, and he was the quintessential cowboy of the silent movie era. But Tim McCoy knew Ed Farlow really well, and Ed Farlow was one of the first young men to settle in the Lander area. And Hollywood wanted to do this covered wagon movie, and so Tim went back to Ed Farlow and talked to him about getting Ray and Bruce to do the Indian part, which they did. They took some 30-odd Arapaho primarily to Hollywood, and that movie was such a hit that it played for the Queen of England, toured Paris and in France and in Germany, all over the country, and it's quite an interesting movie. It was one of the first attempts in color, still a silent film, and if you can, I've got a copy of it.
What was the movie name again?
Called Covered Wagon.
Covered Wagon.
But all of the native people were, in fact, when that movie went to Europe, Tim McCoy arranged to take the whole group with them, all of the Indians, to Europe. While they were waiting to get on a boat, they were allowed to set up their teepees in Central Park in New York City to live, so to speak, until they were ready to board ship and go to England again and to the rest of Europe.
That's neat.
It was quite an undertaking, and so the one that you were, the first one that you did there, what brought that to mind to me is the thing that happened right here in this over the mountain there with film in Hollywood. Some of the very first film that ever used Native Americans in any way, shape, or form.
And another really early one was a silent film made in 1919. And I believe the title was Told in the Mountain, or Told on the Mountain. And it was filmed over in Nez Perce country in Idaho. And they also used Native American extras. But I don't think there's a complete copy in existence anymore. It's neat that you can still see that one.
Okay. The covered wagon had a bit of a resurgence a number of years ago, and that's kind of how I stumbled onto it. And the copy that I have is a silent film of the original film. And then it just kind of died out, which I thought was kind of interesting too. It just wasn't as popular as it was when it first came out.
That's interesting.
Just a quick comment. I love all these movies, and my favorite's Mountain Man with Ryan Keith and Charlton Heston. Which a lot of that film was filmed here in Sublette County, which is kind of cool. And I just watched it the other day, and you know how they rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. They give Mountain Man 1 star.
I have read some movie reviewers say that The Mountain Men is one of the worst movies ever made. And I get enough of a kick. I own a copy, and every now and then, if I need a laugh, I'll watch it. But as Clay was right to point out, Hollywood is entertainment, and it's fiction, and it is not history. And just as I will sometimes say, we have to judge people who lived 200 years ago by their own standards, I guess we have to judge Hollywood by their standards, because they're in a different industry. They're not historians. I don't know, Clay, would you add or take away from that?
First and foremost, it's a business, so it's profit driven. And so they seem to know what, they think they know what puts people in the seats, and that's what they need. And the Revenant grossed $1 billion in worldwide revenues. So, I mean, they got something right as far as entertainment.
Yeah, the Revenant cost $135 million to make.
Yeah, and when they hired me, it was a $60 million budget.
And in the box office, at least by the time that of the report that I read, was $533 million. So it made a huge profit.
United States. That was just in the United States, and the European worldwide revenue made up the rest. It doubled that, and so it was right at $1 billion.
Well, that's a very good point. Well, they have a mission. Let's put it that way. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you very much.